So now let's start talking about the rate reduction for live-in caregivers, because this is going to come into effect August 1st as well. First of all, the rate reduction applies to the rate that is paid to the agency. The state has said it is not supposed to affect the amount of pay the worker receives. We are already getting calls that is going to be happening. So one of the things is, if you are working for an agency providing waiver services for your loved one who lives with you, and you are getting told that by your agency that your pay is going to get cut, call us. We want to monitor all of this. We want to keep track of all this. And then we are taking this to the state to let them know, hey, you've said that this is not, very specifically said, this is not supposed to affect the pay that the caregiver is receiving. We are hearing from these people that it is happening, so that the state can address that. Also, this only applies to attendant care, to PAC, which is on the Family Supports Waiver, or to residential hourly, which is on the CIH waiver. It does not apply to structured family caregiving. We've gotten a lot of calls asking about that. This does not apply to structured family caregiving because this is about an hourly rate that an agency is getting paid. Structured family caregiving is a per diem. It's a daily rate. So this does not apply to structured family caregiving. One of the things I also want to warn you is that I am going to be repeating myself a lot as we go along. And a big part of that is just because we know this is confusing. We know we are getting tons of questions about this. We know that we are getting tons of the same questions about this. And so we want to make certain messages very, very clear. Okay, the live-in caregiver rate reduction only applies to attendant care, to PAC services, and to residential hourly services. And so let's actually take a look at what that rate cut actually is. So right now, an agency gets paid $8.59 for every 15 minutes of attendant care that's provided. The new rate is going to be $7.75 for every 15 minutes of attendant care provided. That's a 9.78% reduction in the rate paid to the agency. PAC currently is agencies get paid $34.39 per hour for PAC. Starting next week, when the caregiver lives with the individual, the agency is only going to get paid $30.71 per hour. That is a 10.71% rate reduction. With residential habilitation, there are actually two levels for hourly ResHab. For level one, a person, or the agency rather, is getting paid $35.02 per hour for every hour of ResHab. That's going to go down to $64 per hour, which is a 12.51% reduction. And if they are doing level two residential habilitation, and knowing whether you're level one or level two, ask your agency or ask your case manager, because that's on the billing side of things. Right now, they are reimbursed at $30.36 per hour. That's going to go down to $28.26 per hour, or a 4.95% rate reduction. Notice, it's not consistent, not even a little bit. But at the same time, yes, it's a reduction. I have heard of an agency that is planning to cut pay by at least by $6 an hour. This isn't a $6 rate reduction either. So let's go over some real life scenarios on this piece. So Jim lives with his girlfriend who's on the health and wellness waiver, and he provides attendant care. Is his rate, or is the rate that his agency gets paid, going to be cut? Yeah, because it doesn't matter what their relationship is. It doesn't matter that he's not a relative. It doesn't matter that he's not a spouse or a legal guardian. It's that he lives with the person he's providing care for. That alone means that the agency is going to get a reduced rate for his attendant care. Jake has a CIH waiver and lives with his parents, Ben and Jennifer, who get paid for residential habilitation level 1 hourly. Is their agency going to have a rate reduction? Yep, they sure are, because he lives with his parents. Deanna rents a room from a family. She provides respite for their son on the family support waiver. Will they have a rate reduction? Nope. Has nothing to do with her relationship, or in this case, it's because she's providing respite. Respite is not part of the rate reduction. It is only attendant care, PAC, or residential hourly. It is not respite, so there will be no rate reduction for that. Catherine's a college student living in the dorms. She provides PAC for Tom. Will her agency's rate be cut? Nope. Even though she's providing PAC, which is one of the services that's impacted by this, she doesn't live with her client. Therefore, the agency is not losing or will not have a rate reduction from this. Jonathan's on Pathways. His son Trip moved in with him. Jonathan uses self-directed care to pay Trip to provide attendant care. Will they be affected? Nope, because the rate reduction only applies to the rate paid to an agency. What makes the difference in this particular case is that they are using self-directed care. That is not impacted by the rate reduction. So I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna come back up here so that we can check for questions on the rate reductions. Okay. So bear with me a little bit while I go through and try to find the questions specifically around the rate reduction. Okay. Sorry, guys. I know I'm being silent as I'm scanning through these. Somebody's saying, I'm not sure how it won't affect pay as now the agency is losing money. That is an excellent point, and I think that's an excellent point to make to decision makers, whether that is your legislators, whether that is candidates, making sure they understand what all of this is and the real life impact it has is a really good idea. Does Indiana have consumer directed services? Attendant care not through an agency? We do. And on the skilled nursing waivers, so the health and wellness pathways for waging and TBI waivers, they've had sometimes it's called self-directed. It's commonly called self-directed care here in Indiana. It's officially called participant-directed care. Sometimes you will see it as consumer-directed care. We've had that on the skilled nursing waivers for several years. That just became an option on the developmental disability waivers. So the family support waiver and the CIH waiver starting January 1st. So it is a relatively new service on the developmental disability side. But yes, that is not, or excuse me, yes, that is now an option available here in Indiana. Does the rate cut apply to home health care? No, it does not. So home health care, commonly called HHA or commonly called Medicaid PA for prior authorization, that is a Medicaid health coverage expense. It is not a waiver expense. So no, the rate cut does not apply to home health care. But I will also say sometimes people get confused whether something, and sometimes even providers and case managers get confused whether something is being provided as attendant care or as a waiver service or as home health care. So you've got to make sure you know what the service is actually being billed as. Ooh. What if you have two family members that work with the individual, but only one lives with the individual? How will that be indicated on the NOA, which is notice of action? It's not about being put on the notice of action. It's about how it is billed, and so there's going to be a qualifier. Now, agencies are going to have to report the relationship of the caregiver to the individual, and that is in part where it will be noted. And I'm also going to say, guys, I don't do waiver billing, so this is my understanding. Can I guarantee I'm 100% correct when it comes to a billing question? I cannot. So, but that is my understanding of it. Will the rate change for home and community service also? If you mean home and community assistance, which is commonly called homemaker services and is available on the health and wellness, TBI, and pathways waivers, that rate is not changing. If you mean home and community-based services, that is the official term for Medicaid waivers in general. So the rate reduction for live-in caregivers applies to attendant care, PAC, and residential habilitation hourly, and only those three services. Um, So somebody else is saying, my agency has been paying much more than the $16 an hour rate that the state used to factor the initial rate. So it makes sense that if the agency's rate is getting cut by $5, it makes sense that they would need to reduce the caregiver's rate as well. Um, but isn't this punishing the agencies that have been trying to do right by families? I think that is an excellent thing that the state needs to hear, especially when we already have such a massive workforce shortage. Um, I think that's something they need to hear. Um, Somebody's asking me a specific question about billing, and I'm going to be perfectly honest. I don't know those answers because billing is not something I ever have had to do. So what I would do is I would actually contact provider relations at BEADS to ask them those questions, because I think they will give you the accurate answer to that. Okay. What does PAC stand for? I'm so sorry. I normally try not to speak in acronyms, and I totally did it this time. PAC stands for Participant Assistance and Care. It is one of the services that's available exclusively on the Family Supports Waiver. And basically, PAC is an extra set of hands to help out however you need. That can be somebody helping somebody shower or get dressed or something like that. That can also be somebody taking them out in the community and doing all sorts of things. PAC is one of those services that can be very, very generalized and can do a lot of different things. Somebody is asking, what is self-directed care? I'm going to be perfectly honest. We have an entire webinar on that on our YouTube channel, which is the Arc of Indiana. Heather Dane, who is the director of waiver services for the Bureau of Disability Services, came and did a webinar for us on that back in March. So you can find that webinar to learn a whole lot more about self-directed care then or there. My mother provides PA and attendant care hours to her mom. Will only attendant care be cut, or will PA be cut too? It all depends on whether or not your mother lives with her mother. If they live together, her attendant care or the attendant care rate paid to the agency will be cut. The PA rate will not be. But if your mother does not live with her mom, nope, it's not getting cut at all. Um, Is it a rate reduction for a relative to work with a grandson that they don't live with in the same home? If you do not live in the same home, that rate is not getting reduced. It is only if the caregiver lives with the waiver client, and it's regardless of their relationship. So it doesn't matter if they are related. Doesn't matter if they're in a romantic relationship. It's a matter of are they actually living together? Um, for a family support client whose parent is a paid DSP for PAC, their pay would be reduced. The way I know that this is a little tedious because I'm being really careful with how I say things, but it's because the devil's in the details on this. It's that the rate paid to the agency will be reduced if they live together. It is not supposed to affect the actual pay that the DSP gets paid. That is what Beads has said, and that is what they put in their bulletin. Um, if we're already paying caregivers a high rate for attendant care, but we lose pay as a provider, how will we be able to stay open? That is absolutely part of what you've got to talk with Beads and with the legislators about. They have to understand the real world implications for all of this. Again, I'm getting asked a billing question. I can't answer the billing questions, guys. So I recommend reaching out to provider relations at Beads so that they can answer those billing questions for you. Ooh, here we've got an interesting question, and I'm going to be perfectly honest. Not 100% sure. Our child has a full apartment with a separate entrance attached to our home. Will paid parents agency receive a cut in pay? I don't know that answer. I think it's probably nuanced, and I think that it is not common enough that they probably do not have an answer for that. I could be wrong, um, but especially if technically you've got separate addresses, um, it's simply a matter of you're sharing a wall. Think about it like living in an apartment complex. That is the argument I would make. I don't know if it would be successful, but that's the argument I would make is that, this is he has his own apartment. We simply share a wall. Um, so I'd make that argument. Um, let's see. Somebody's asking, as a case manager, if we find out that a company has lowered the paid caregivers rate, what should we do? I would say give us a call here at the Arc of Indiana because we are literally making a spreadsheet of that information so that we can share that with Beads so that they can address it. So I would, since you're the case manager, you have to ask the individual's permission or get the individual to call us either way. But it's really important that we actually document that so we can document how often is this happening, what are the actual implications of that so that we can get so that we can get some action on it one way or another. Um, will my case manager need to update the service authorization to show I'm a live-in caregiver? I think that is more what the agency will have to do because what the case manager is doing is submitting the request for the service. They're submitting and getting a notice of action for the service. This is really because if this were an unrelated caregiver, or if this were somebody who did not live with the individual, it would have no impact on that service authorization or on that notice of action or that person-centered individualized service plan or PCISP. And so I think this is actually going to come more from the bill that the provider agency submits. Um, Does it apply to homemaker services? Great question. Nope. It only applies to attendant care, PAC, and residential services. Um, With the agency I work for, they have notified me that they will no longer pay mileage while I care for my adult son on the waiver with PAC services. That, I believe, is how they are making some of the money back from the rate cut. One of the other things is that transportation is a separate service that is actually available under the waiver. So you can talk with your case manager about whether or not adding transportation services to your plan is appropriate, and how that would work. But that is also another option that can potentially be available to people. Um, let's see. Oh, somebody, I I love you for doing this. Somebody actually put in the Q&A that the Indiana Health Coverage Programs newsletter or bulletin, and they call it IHCP, that stands for Indiana Health Coverage Programs, newsletter states, quote, the proposed rate adjustment is not intended to and should not reduce caregiver hourly wages or limit a caregiver's ability to support individuals in accessing the community. You are absolutely right. That is a direct quote from the bulletin the state published announcing the rate reduction. And that is why we are gathering we are trying to gather examples of individuals being told that their hourly wages are being cut. Um, let's see. What about if the daughter is the caregiver but not a live-in? How are they determining if the caregiver is live-in? They're looking at your address because they have your address. No, and in your case, because your daughter does not live with the person they are providing care for, there will not be a rate reduction. And the reason I say they have your addresses, well, they have the waiver participant's address, and the agency that your daughter works for has her address just for payroll and tax purposes. Because those addresses don't match, they can see that they do not live together. Let's see. Sorry, guys. I know that I'm going through this. We are just getting in a lot of questions, and a lot of them are about who can be paid as a caregiver. That is our next section. So I want to make sure I want to check for the rate reduction questions first. Um, has there been a reason given of why it is only a rate reduction if you live with the person? They've given a reason for it. What the state is saying is that because that uh, that agencies pay for caregivers or DSPs to get to their clients' homes, and since the caregiver lives with the client, the agency does not have to pay that DSP to get to the client's home because they already live there. That is their official reason for doing that. I have to be really careful about how I answer that, because some agencies, when a DSP is going from one client's house to another, there are some agencies who will pay the DSP their hourly wage. There are some who will pay a mileage rate reimbursement to them. I don't know of a single agency or a single employer in any industry who pays an employee to get to and from their office to start or end their day. But that is the justification the state is using for this rate reduction. Um, let's see. Um, Somebody was chiming in. If the apartment is separate and has its own address, then the rate should not be reduced. That is absolutely the argument that I would make. That's from a question we had earlier. Um, lives in the home but pays rent, etc. If we can produce the lease agreement, does the rate still get cut? Yes, because you still live at the same address. And so that is really what they are looking for there. Um, my daughter is on the CIH waiver. She lives with me. Will there be a rate cut? If because she's got the CIH waiver, if you are being paid for residential hourly services, the agency's rate will be reduced because the on a CIH waiver, the only service that affects is residential hourly. When will this change start? August 1st. Um, okay. Um, so if the caregiver and client do not live together, will attendant care rate still be cut? Nope. It is only if they live together. Um, okay. So we've got a question that I think is relevant to this. Um, is there a difference in agency pay for family caregivers providing services for their family members? Basically, are rates different with different agencies on the pick list? Yes, and that's in all honesty, that is simply just capitalism. The rate that the state pays the agency is going to be the same for all agencies, but how much that agency pays their workers is up to the agency. So, um, and that's true of any business. Um, does the statement in the bulletin mean the state will be enforcing a set rate of pay? That is why we are bringing this to them. Somebody said, this doesn't make any sense, though. I am not going to disagree with you, my dear. Um, let's see. Uh, let's see. Okay. Somebody asked, how many agencies have you gotten on your spreadsheet? So far, we've gotten calls about one agency. So I don't know if this is exclusive to one agency. No, I cannot tell you what that agency's name is. That would not be fair, especially if there could be some, if there is to be any re-education on this. But if this is affecting anybody, we want to know. So let's see. So if I care for my neighbor's child on a waiver and they care for my child on a waiver who lives at home, the agency will not get a cut in rates. That is absolutely correct. And I want to come back to that idea later on because that is going to be something we address in the next section too. Does the rate change start August 1st? Yes. Um, let's see. Uh, So, all right. So now that I've gotten to all the questions about the rate reduction, I know the big thing is all about who can be a paid caregiver. And let me start by saying this is ridiculously confusing. I fully understand why everyone is so confused by all of this. We had to finally resort to using symbols to say who could be paid, how much they could be paid. I think we did like 12 different drafts on the chart that we made, and it is not you. It is that confusing. And it's no wonder that you're getting so many different messages about who can be a paid caregiver, how much they can be paid, how that impacts services and all that, because right now everyone is confused. So let me start by saying the information I am about to give is based exclusively on the actual amendments that were submitted to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So this comes directly from the amendment itself, what is actually in writing. Okay. Let me also say, I know many of you are getting conflicting information, and you're getting conflicting information from multiple sources, and multiple sources who are authority figures. Totally understand that. It's because it is that confusing. And even we are getting calls from provider agencies to try to figure this out because it is that confusing. So let's go ahead and start on who can be a paid caregiver, what and what changes are about to go into effect, what things are already in place and actually not changing. And so let's start with structured family caregiving, because we have gotten so many questions on structured family caregiving. There is nothing changing with structured family caregiving. So if you are providing structured family caregiving, please let that reassure you. There is no change to structured family caregiving. One of the reasons we had it on our chart was because our charts were about who could be paid as a caregiver. People can still be paid as a caregiver in structured family caregiving, but there aren't changes. A lot of people have been asking about, the fact that we point out that that a parent of a minor child, that child has to meet the definition of extraordinary care. That's true. Guess what? That went into effect January 1st. So that's already in effect. If a legally responsible individual is getting paid for structured family caregiving, and remember, a legally responsible individual only refers to a parent of a minor child, um, or a legal guardian of a minor child, or a spouse. That is the definition of legally responsible individual for waiver services. Okay. That child or spouse must meet the definition of extraordinary care. Again, that has actually been in place since January 1st of this year. So if you have been getting paid since January 1st, your loved one already meets that definition of extraordinary care. I want that to reassure you, because I know we've had a lot of parents who've been really, really scared by this. If you have been getting paid for structured family caregiving since January 1, your loved one already, and you have to meet that definition of extraordinary care, your loved one already meets that definition. Remember too that structured family caregiving is paid on a per diem, which means per day basis. It is not an hourly pay. That's why we didn't have to worry about the whole live-in caregiver rate reduction, is because those were all hourly services, not a per diem service. And so it is not impacted by that live-in caregiver rate reduction, because I know we have gotten a lot of questions about that. And so I want to be very, very clear about that. So I'm probably going to repeat it like 4 times. Again, legally responsible individual only refers to the spouse of a person on a waiver, or the parent, or technically a legal guardian of a minor child on a waiver. And one of the reasons, most of the people on here are individuals who have a loved one with an intellectual or developmental disability. I recognize it's not all, but oftentimes, because that is our specialty, we wind up overlooking that sometimes we have individuals who may be on a waiver who may be married. And so that's going to also inform some of the other things, some of the other answers that we're going to give here. Requiring a waiver participant, like I said earlier, requiring a waiver participant to have extraordinary care needs or extraordinary care needs and intensive nursing needs began January 1st of 2026. Attendant care and PAC services require that an individual have those extraordinary care needs and the intensive nursing needs for an LRI to be paid. One of the things is that all LRIs combined can get paid for a total of 40 hours per week. Again, that is not a change. That has been in place, okay? But it does not impact another relative's hours. So, for example, and most importantly, it does not reduce the waiver participants' hours. So let's say, for example, you've got a 15-year-old on the health and wellness waiver. They meet that definition of extraordinary care needs. And by the way, that's the next slide. Don't worry. They meet that definition of extraordinary care needs, and they have intensive nursing needs. Okay, this 15-year-old boy who's on a continuous ventilator. Well, that parent, even though he's a minor, he's under 18, that parent can get paid to provide attendant care for him. When we talk about how much how they can get paid, that parent or both parents can get paid for a total of 40 hours together. So mom could get paid for all 40 hours, dad gets paid for nothing. Mom could get paid for 20 hours a week, dad could get paid for 20 hours a week. But this is a kid who is approved for 100 hours a week. Mom getting paid 40 or 20 hours a week, dad getting paid 20 hours a week. That's all they can get paid because it's 40 hours total for the both of them combined. He's still approved for 100 hours, so there's still 60 hours available to him that any other provider can provide those services. So let's say we bring in grandma. Grandma can get paid for 40 hours because she's a relative, so she's going to get limited to 40 hours. And we can have that nursing student that you know come in and provide the other 20 hours. Or your agency may have other DSPs who can provide that attendant care and take care of those other 60 hours. But when we're talking about legally responsible individuals, if there's only one legally responsible individual, they can get paid up to 40 hours a week. If there's more than one legally responsible individual, meaning both parents of a child under 18, the two of them combined can get paid for 40 hours a week. So let's talk about that definition of extraordinary care and intensive nursing needs. The state has defined extraordinary care needs as caregiving needs beyond typical age-appropriate caregiving. So this is important for people who are on structured family caregiving, because if you are a legally responsible individual, in order for you to get paid for structured family caregiving, your loved one has to have extraordinary care needs, meaning caregiving beyond typical age-appropriate caregiving. For example, let's say you've got a 2-year-old who is on the waiver, or who's on the health and wellness waiver, and that 2-year-old is not potty trained. That 2-year-old cannot independently feed themselves. That 2-year-old cannot bathe themselves. Guess what? Most 2-year-olds cannot do that. That is actually typical. That's age appropriate. No 2-year-old is able to bathe themselves. So that alone would not meet extraordinary care needs. But let's say that 2-year-old also is not able to walk. Well, it's typical for a 2-year-old to be able to walk. So that's where, we're likely into that extraordinary care needs arena. But let's say instead of 2 years old, they're 15 years old and still cannot bathe themselves, still cannot go to the bathroom on their own, still cannot feed themselves. That is not typical for a 15-year-old. So that is beyond the needs of a typical age-appropriate caregiving. So that absolutely meets the extraordinary care needs definition. So here we're talking about the same skills, but depending on the age of the individual, depends is where we get that justification of is an extraordinary care need, because is that skill age appropriate for them to have or not age appropriate for them to have? And that's kind of the explanation there. Then if we have that legally responsible individual, that parent of a minor under 18, or that spouse, not only does the individual have to meet that definition of extraordinary care need, meaning that caregiving beyond typical age-appropriate caregiving, for them to get paid for attendant care or PAC services, they also have to have an intensive nursing need. That's going to be a continuous ventilator. We tried to argue with the state that that there are people who need a ventilator, but they don't necessarily need it continuously. The state said, nope, we're going to require a continuous ventilator. Tracheostomy care is something that they are looking at here. Um, TPN, because I cannot say that P word. I don't know how to actually pronounce it. I tried to talk to nurses and stuff. I still can't get that word down. And I am not a medical professional. Both of my sisters are nurses. I am the one who will explain Medicaid regs to you. So I am not the science girl. My understanding of this, and I can't swear that I'm accurate here, is that TPN is almost like getting your nutrition from an IV. So this does not mean G tube. This is more intensive than that. This is something that is a nursing need. So those are the ones that they've pointed to, but then they also say other comparable needs are part of it, but they're looking for that level of intensity, that level of nursing intervention is needed. Notice this does not include behavioral needs at all. Okay, that was a choice that the state made, but that is the definition of extraordinary care and intensive nursing needs. Okay. Um, I've gotten a whole bunch of questions that have popped in. And while I was going to save questions, I think I want to go ahead and look at the questions right now because I have a feeling they're going to be much more about this. Let me get down. Okay. That I'm going to get to in a minute. I thought a spouse can be a structured family caregiving caregiver. They can be. It's just that the person who is on the waiver has to meet the definition of extraordinary care need for that spouse to be paid. So, yes, that absolutely can happen. Um, there are a lot of people with structured family caregiving that don't meet the definition of extraordinary care. This is not something that was enforced. When will it be enforced? It was supposed to be enforced beginning January 1st of this year. I think there are a lot more people who actually do meet the definition of extraordinary care than you may realize. Because again, they're looking at a lot of factors in there, but they actually had to meet that definition of extraordinary care beginning January 1st. Let's see. What will happen if a child would lose structured family caregiving, and that is the only service beside case management? Health and wellness will not allow just case management, so will they lose their waiver and potentially impact their Medicaid? Here's the thing. The services are still available to them. It's simply a matter of who can get paid to provide that service. So someone else can be brought in to provide that service, whether it's structured family caregiving or whether it's attended care or some other service. Another provider can be brought in. It's exclusively about can the parent of that minor child get paid. And so even if the parent of the minor child can't get paid, that minor child is still eligible for other services, and it would be bringing in a different direct support professional or a different waiver provider. Um, let's see. Um, okay. I have twins that are 17 that are approved for the waiver, but since they have not graduated high school yet, they are on the wait list, but approved. So they're not approved for the waiver yet. They're on the waiting list, but they have not started waiver services yet. Can my spouse get paid to care for them now? And can my spouse be paid for both of them? Until their waiver begins, there are no waiver services to pay you. So you have to wait until you are actually on the waiver for a waiver service to be used. If your children have Medicaid health coverage, it might be possible to get paid for home health services. That is a completely different topic, different conversation, and different set of requirements for that. But right now, they're still on the waiting list, and so No, they don't have the waiver yet to be able to provide waiver services. Oh, but the second part of your question, could your spouse be paid for each of them? Once they actually start the waiver, yes, he could be paid for each of them. Um, wow. So complex medical and complex behavioral combination for profound autism is not included. They do not look at the behavioral aspect of this at all for the definition of extraordinary care or intensive nursing needs. So, yeah, they're looking exclusively at the medical for this specific definition, which only applies to the parent of a minor child getting paid for attendant care or PAC services, or for a spouse to get paid for attendant care or PAC services. There are many other services that would be available to them. This is exclusively about a parent of a minor getting paid or a spouse getting paid. And that's part of the issue here is it is so complex because we're talking about these things, and the answer is different depending on the details. Because can that individual get PAC services? Absolutely. Can that individual get attendant care services? Absolutely. Can that parent of a minor child get paid to provide that service? Only if they meet those intensive nursing needs. So, but someone else could get paid for that. And yes, I know that is frustrating to a lot of people. Again, this is where I'm going to say I'm explaining it, not necessarily agreeing with it. Um, my case manager says my child, who is 11, doesn't qualify for extreme care despite nighttime seizures requiring someone to sleep with her and her inability to dress, toilet, bathe, feed herself. She has epilepsy and Down syndrome. Does this seem right? That is something I would absolutely appeal. And that is something that I would absolutely get a second opinion on, whether that it, since your case manager seems reluctant. First of all, I'd start by asking for a case management supervisor to come in and review the situation, because as you are describing it, I would absolutely think she meets that definition of extraordinary care. Now, part of this could be that there is a misunderstanding about whether the person has to meet only the definition of extraordinary care, or do they have to meet the definition of extraordinary care and intensive nursing needs. And so, for example, if your daughter is on the family support waiver, well, family support waiver doesn't have structured family caregiving, which is the one that just needs the extraordinary care needs. If she's on family support, since structured family caregiving is not a service, the only service that a parent of a minor could get paid for is PAC services. And there she would need both the extraordinary care needs and the intensive nursing needs. And that might be why we've got that um, discrepancy. But if your daughter is on the health and wellness waiver, then structured family caregiving is an option under that. And so that's when I'd absolutely bring in somebody else from the case management company first to be able to look at that. And then if you need to, you can always escalate it directly to your BEADS local office for a different review of that. I'm really, really glad you asked about that. And that's one of the other things, guys, is that you can appeal things. You can request reviews. If you don't think a decision is right, you can absolutely request that somebody else look at the situation and make a determination. So you have that right. Um, so So just to clarify, for structured family caregiving, your child just needs to meet the extraordinary care needs, which can be caregiving beyond typical age appropriate needs. They don't have to meet the lower section of the intensive nursing needs. That is absolutely correct. She adds, a lot of us were panicking that there would be a change and we'd be removed from it. No, my dear, we were getting all of those calls from people who were very, very confused by that. That is why we are doing this special section of Ask the ARC, because we know that confusion existed. No, for structured family caregiving, it is exclusively the extraordinary care needs. For PAC or attendant care, that's where the intensive nursing needs come in. Uh, let's see. Behaviors are medical. If it's an institution that as if it's in an institution that's 1-to-1 ratio. I'm not disagreeing that behaviors are a medical issue. I firmly believe that too. But it does not meet the definition of intensive nursing needs because it is a very, very limited definition on what they are referring to as intensive nursing needs. Okay. If you have both, and I think she means both extraordinary care needs and intensive nursing needs, does that change anything for the health and wellness waiver? It means you've got options. You can either go the structured family caregiver route or you can go the attendant care route. Um, um, if both needs are there, does that change anything as far as payment? Um, and we can't ever find a nurse, so it's left me doing 24/7. Um, no, I completely understand that, my dear. So yeah, there's actually a big difference in pay. So structured family caregiving is a per diem or a per day rate, whereas attendant care is an hourly rate. So there would be a big difference there, and that's something that you can call around to ask to find out how different companies are paying because different companies absolutely pay different rates. So it's something that you can absolutely call around and ask about so that you can make those informed choices. Okay. So somebody says, bear with me. I'm an old parent. I take exception to that, my dear, because I have a feeling you and I are close in age. Prior to COVID, parents were unable to get paid to provide any waiver paid services to minor children, right? That depended on your waiver. So, on the developmental disability side, or what we used to call the BEAD side, a parent of a minor child could not get paid on the family support or the CIH waiver at all. In fact, it only began January 1st that a parent of a minor child could get paid on the family support waiver at all. But that was not true on what used to be called the aged and disabled waiver. That was something that went into effect shortly before COVID happened. And then when COVID happened, that put in a whole different set of rules and regulations um, and changed everything. So, so understand where you're coming from. That applied to family support and CIH. It did not apply to what used to be called the aged and disabled waiver. Okay. Okay. So we've answered all of those questions. Don't get me wrong. I know we still have a ton of questions about paid caregiver, and then we've got some more general questions. But I wanted to stop because I knew how far we were with that, and let's keep going. So one of the other changes that is going into effect is that the state is aligning the definition of relative across all five waivers. So this is not a change for anybody who has been on the family support waiver or the CIH waiver. This is absolutely going to be a change for the people who are on the skilled nursing waivers. So health and wellness, TBI, and pathways. This is a change for you guys. Um, because now the definition of relative is expanding to include a whole lot more people. So, so the definition of relative is a parent of an adult, a sibling, a child, a grandparent, a grandchild, aunt or uncle, niece or nephew, and first cousin. That includes whether they are natural, step, half, adopted, or in law. Your brother in law is a relative, even if you don't like him. Your step grandchild is absolutely your grandchild. They are your relative, my dear. That first cousin, yep, he may have married in, but you like him. He's actually funny. He makes you laugh. You love having him around. He is your relative. Okay, so the state is expanding the definition of relative for the skilled nursing waivers, but what they're doing is they're making it consistent across all 5 of them. Now, legal guardians of adults, so this is very different, legal guardians of adults and relatives. How is their pay getting changed? So I will say previously, technically it's right now, but previously, a legal guardian of an adult or a relative could get paid up to 40 hours per week per service per waiver participant. So for example, you've got a son on the CIH waiver, you could get paid for 40 hours of residential habilitation and 20 hours of day habilitation or DHI per week. That was, in fact, that was something that was pretty common. Okay. Starting August 1st, a legal guardian or relative can each only be paid up to 40 hours per week total per waiver participant for all of the services combined. And part of it is so difficult to figure out how exactly to word all of that. And it is leading to a lot of confusion. This does not mean that the waiver participant only gets 40 hours of service. It does not mean that. It means that the relative or the legal guardian can only get paid for 40 hours of the services available to them. Services are still available. That relative or that guardian can only be paid for 40 of them. So for example, in that example we had earlier where the relative was getting paid for 40 hours of residential habilitation and 20 hours of DHI, now they could get paid for, say, 30 hours of residential habilitation and 10 hours of workplace assistance. That's a total of 40 hours. And somebody else, including another relative, could provide the remaining services. Okay? It's the limitations are not on the waiver participant. The limitations are not a reduction in hours. The limitations are on how much that caregiver can get paid to provide those services. But the services still exist. So let's do some real life scenarios here, okay? Luke is approved for 100 hours of attendant care per week. I know some of you are laughing at me. I'm trying to make math easy. Mom could get paid for 40 hours per week. Dad could get paid for 40 hours a week. Sister could get paid for the remaining 20. 40 plus 40 plus 20 is that full 100 hours, okay? Or mom could get paid for 40 hours a week, and unrelated DSPs could get paid for the remaining 60 hours per week. That's one scenario. Laura has 2 kids on the waiver. She can provide 40 hours of paid care for her daughter, and she can provide 40 hours of paid care for her son, because the 40-hour limit is per waiver participant. So if you've got 2 kids on the waiver, you can be paid up to 40 hours for one child and up to 40 hours for another. I just said child. I am, excluding age in that definition. Bobby used to provide 40 hours of attendant care and 20 hours of home and community assistance to her brother. August 1st, she can only be paid for 40 hours total. So she can choose to either get paid exclusively for attendant care, or she could get paid for 10 hours of attendant care and 10 hours of home and community assistance. You can play with how you want to split that up. It's simply a matter of Bobby can only get paid for 40 hours of it. The rest of the hours still exist. You just got to pay it to somebody else to get it. So now let's break it down by waiver. So paid caregivers for the family supports and the CIH waivers. Effective August 1st, we're going to have a big change for them in what services they can get paid for. Relatives and legal guardians of adults can get paid for PAC services, which is only available on the family support waiver. I want to point out that a legal guardian cannot get paid if it is self-directed care. If a person is on the CIH waiver, a relative or a legal guardian can get paid for residential habilitation. A legal guardian cannot get paid if it is self-directed care. In all honesty, a legal guardian can never get paid for self-directed care. That is specifically prohibited because the legal guardian is the one making the decision on who to hire. They cannot hire themselves, is essentially what it boils down to. And that is that is more of a safety and oversight thing. Relatives or legal guardians can get paid for respite. Again, legal guardian cannot get paid for self-directed care. A relative or a legal guardian can get paid for structured family caregiving, which is only available on the CIH waiver between those two. Relative or legal guardian can get paid for transportation. And a family member or relative or legal guardian can get paid for workplace assistance, which is another service on the waiver. Legally responsible individuals, meaning a spouse or a parent of a minor child, can get paid for PAC services if the waiver participant meets that definition of extraordinary care and has intensive nursing needs. And again, that does not include behavioral needs. The CIH waiver does not allow for LRIs to be paid at all for any service. Here's one of the biggest changes. Relatives and under the family support and CIH waivers, relatives and legal guardians can no longer be paid for adult day services, day habilitation, and I know a lot of relatives and guardians provided day hab, or DHI is sometimes what it was called. You can no longer be paid for that effective August 1st. Cannot be paid for pre-vocational services. You cannot be paid for occupational, physical, psychological, or speech therapies. You cannot be paid for behavior support services, for career exploration and planning, for community transition services, for extended employment services, for facility-based support services, for music therapy, for personal emergency response services, for recreation therapy, for remote supports, for specialized medical equipment and supplies, or for wellness coordination. That's about a 2/3 reduction in the number of services that a relative or a legal guardian can get paid for. Some of them make sense. I mean, in the medical field, you're not supposed to actually treat your family members. So the fact that, they can no longer get paid for OT, PT, speech, or psychological services, okay, I can see that. And it kind of makes sense to me that, a personal emergency response service, that, you think of the button, I've fallen and I can't get up. It's not exclusively that, but that's what's always in my head because I'm old like that. Okay, I can see that. But then some of them are surprising. I know a lot of family members provided day habilitation. I know that there were family members who did career exploration and planning. I do not understand why the state has decided that you can't get paid to take your child to go volunteer so that they can learn job skills. I don't know. But those are the rules that are going into effect August 1st. Now let's move on to health and wellness. Effective August 1st, relatives can be paid for attendant care, for home and community assistance, for skilled respite care, for structured family caregiving, and for transportation. And transportation is a newly added service for relatives on the health and wellness waiver starting August 1st. Legal guardians can be paid for attendant care, except self-directed, for structured family caregiving, and for transportation. Again, that's an added service. Legally responsible individuals can be paid for structured family caregiving if the individual meets that definition of extraordinary care. They can get paid for attendant care if they meet the definition of extraordinary care and intensive nursing needs. I know I've said that about 6 times now. Again, part of that is to just keep reinforcing that, because I know this is confusing and it's hard to keep straight. So that's why I keep doing that. Relatives can no longer be paid for adult day services, for assisted living, or for extended services. On the TBI waiver, effective August 1st, relatives can be paid for attendant care, home and community assistance, residential habilitation, skilled respite, structured family caregiving, and transportation. Again, that transportation is an added service. Legal guardians can be paid for attendant care, residential habilitation, and those two, not if it's self-directed. They can be paid for structured family caregiving, and they can be paid for transportation. Again, that's an added service. Legally responsible individuals can be paid for structured family caregiving if the individual meets the definition of extraordinary care. They can be paid for attendant care if the individual meets the definition of extraordinary care and has intensive nursing needs. Relatives can no longer be paid for adult day services, for day habilitation, for assisted living, for behavior support services, or for extended employment services. Legal guardians of an adult have not lost any services they can be paid for under a TBI waiver. And that's simply because there were so few services that a legal guardian could get paid for in the first place. So that's why there's no change there. This is where we also need to consider some alternate options, okay? So for example, if you are a relative or a legal guardian for that matter, and you were getting paid for day habilitation or DHI, or you were getting paid for career exploration and planning, maybe you're providing or doing the same types of activities, but you're billing it under PAC or under residential habilitation, because you can still do those, the things you would do under career exploration and planning, you can do those same things under PAC, but not everything you can do under PAC would be eligible for career exploration and planning. So it's more that PAC and residential habilitation are broad enough and general enough that it could absorb some of those other services. Somebody earlier mentioned this, and the funny part was it was in here. I love whoever the person who said this. You are wonderful for even thinking about this, but absolutely swap with friends. If you've got a friend who also has a child with a disability, you care for their kid, they care for your kid. If you're doing it at the same time, who cares? If you guys are going out to the park together, you're still caring for their child, they're still caring for your child. You're just swapping with one another. And so think about the people from Special Olympics, the people from your support groups, the people just in your community. Do you have somebody that and that you trust, and that you would be, you can provide services for one another? That's okay. Consider community resources like parks, libraries, YMCAs. Yes, those are community supports. Is that actually enough to actually support, to fully take care of everything for your loved one? Of course not. But are there things that they do have that could actually absolutely benefit your loved one? Sure. Take advantage of it. It's already there. And especially if it's through your parks or your library, you're already paying for it through your taxes anyway. So go ahead and take advantage of those things. You may not be able to bill for career exploration and planning anymore, but you can still, make sure your child is learning those skills or being exposed to that career exploration in other ways, even if you aren't getting paid for it. And I'm not trying to diminish that, because I recognize, well, before I get there, consider using self-directed care to recruit other caregivers, because I realize that one of the biggest reasons why relatives and parents and legal guardians are the ones providing that paid care is because they can't find other caregivers or they can't find other caregivers that they can trust. One of the things to consider doing is using self-directed care, because when you use self-directed care, you are the one who recruits, hires, trains, and maintains your own staff. You also get to choose how much to pay them. Now, there's a range for it. So, with PAC services, for example, you as the employer can choose to pay that PAC provider anywhere from $15 an hour to $30 an hour. There's a lot of nuance to all of that. And so if this is something you want to look into more, I absolutely encourage you to watch our webinar on self-directed care with Heather Dane, because she does a great job of explaining how all of that works. But one of the biggest concerns a lot of family members have is that, how do I make sure that I'm hiring good people? Well, one of the ways you hire good people is by paying them a living wage. And self-directed care gives you the opportunity to be more flexible in how much they pay. You pay the actual care provider. So that might be another way that you can hire somebody to work with your loved one. And that in turn could mean that you could go out and get a more traditional job or something like that. So that because I know a lot of people, the biggest reason that they are acting as the paid caregiver is because there's no one to work with their loved one. So as a result, they aren't able to maintain a traditional job, and they get paid from the waiver so that they can pay their electric bill. I mean, let's be honest, nobody is getting rich off of being a paid caregiver for their loved one through the waiver. This is about making sure that you have a roof over your head and can pay your basic bills. If you use self-directed care, you can potentially hire somebody at a higher wage, which in turn means that you are more that they may have more skills. They are going to be more likely to show up. They are less likely to have big turnover. And then as a result, if you've got that stable caregiver, you can then go out and get a more traditional job too. And I'm saying that simply as something to consider with all that. And that's the big thing, is this is about considering your options. Not all options are going to work for everybody, but it's about thinking about what is actually out there, what things you can actually do, and then what is going to work for you and your family. So I'm going to stop again and look at questions here.